nice to have that in print.
Yeah. Very good.
There's content at the end of the book that I did not read online.
This is
I see.
So I think there's additional content that either was excavated through recovered notes or something like that in the book. Because he was talking about like swapping user spaces for supporting multiple users on a computer. I don't remember reading that in the online version. So
wait, this has other stuff in it?
I think this kind of does because like there's this. I mean I was just skimming. I'd have to find it again, but you know he's talking about like infinite dictionaries here, which I don't remember reading about.
The online copy.
Yeah, like user swapping, for example. I don't remember reading about user swapping.
Reading about that either.
Yeah, so there's definitely content here that maybe was recovered from notes since the online version was published or something.
Take a quick look. I'll be careful with it.
Yes. Let's see here. How is that?
Good though, I like it.
Published in '79.
This one right here. Yeah.
So I didn't know that combat is based
Oh, we actually live?
that or
No, we're not live.
What
This is just recording.
Oh.
But I like the camera on this.
Oh, yeah.
That is a really good
That's a
resolution.
good, that's nice.
This is a System 76 Gazelle. So they specialize in laptops for Linux. And yeah, this thing only cost me like less than $800. Super happy with it.
boards of ships.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, is there other people here who can read these discs from yeah. These,
That was what? 2007?
What format are discs in?
They look like Apple
I
too.
don't know, but they're like floppy discs.
Yeah,
I used to have search for the CPM.
Oh, in Linux, there is a utility import. If you have a floppy drive,
Yeah, that's a nice arrangement. Circles around that.
yeah, yeah.
Also, there is
What you should consider looking into also is a device called Capital. It is a analog floppy drive and basically uses digital or analog to digital conversion so that you can read pretty much anything off the drive. Amiga format, Apple format, Apple Lisa Twiggy format. I mean, like it's got support for God knows how whatever. So that might be a thing.
yeah, that could work, yeah. I guess I brought them here because I was someone could scan it.
It used to be a I don't know if it's still sold, but I'm sure you can find one on eBay.
Check this out. Monterey patterns.
Oh, wow.
That's the grading, yeah. That's pretty cool. I just got this like Friday.
Wow. That's neat.
Isn't that nifty? It's called Po Motion. The book, yeah. There's like 3 of them.
Neat.
The other 2 soon. Figured that was kind of like your thing in a way.
Yes. Oh, that's actually kind of cool.
See, it'd be good for like implementing. You could probably make Mari patterns in Fortnite Clues as well.
I would imagine, yeah.
I mean, I've done them with just overlapping 2 HTML5 canvases and just.
That's pretty cool. Is the
Yeah.
the print resolution is the
Is this also like a copy?
And it was a tiny Pascal and
That's
what?
really cool.
In
That's fascinating.
I remember
Oh,
the
yeah.
days when
Yeah.
Pascal was a production language.
Work was
That's trippy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was
I am fascinated.
I'm trying now. Now you got my mind spinning. Let's see, like, how can I synthesize arbitrary Monterey patterns?
Yes.
This is what I want.
Right.
Which two gradings or patterns do I need?
Yeah, that's actually kind of cool.
oh yeah. Language nobody wanted.
That's a good.
Yeah, if you could do that with like 3D Moiré patterns, or I think the aperiodic gradings are called glass patterns. We can basically get any shape with that. So speckled transparency.
I'm wondering if it actually. I'm trying to forget. Does it help if
Well,
it's
that sounds like
not a fixed grading on one of them, or does it give you latitude out of how it?
I think there's no Moiré pattern if the grading below is periodic and the grading above is aperiodic. So if you have a grid of squares underneath, and if you have a Penrose tiling above, there'll be no Moiré pattern at all.
Okay, I'm sure that Ed will like to hear it. You have access to the place where Dennis has been posting?
I do not. My plan was to
I
send.
thought that he gave you and me permission to do that.
No, because I, like everybody else, forgot about it, and yeah. But I figure what I'll do is I'll get in touch with Dennis and send him the files electronically. So the video upload will probably be slower, but at least we'll have something.
No big deal, but
You're gonna upload it to YouTube?
Dennis, he's gonna send it to Dennis and Dennis will upload it to YouTube.
Yeah,
It'll be in the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, that was my plan. Okay.
But it might be a really great file and he's gonna be using his computer for his presentation, so he won't be recording it presumably.
I could record the screen.
Well, that's up to you. I think that might be a reasonable thing. You ready to go, Brad? Sure. Is there anybody that's not ready to go?
Alrighty, so according to the agenda, we're going to take a look at the haikus. There's been not a ton since last time. I don't recall where we left off last time, but I guess we'll start with the slide rule. Well, there's a slide rule.
Does it move?
Yes, my question also.
The mouse one? I don't know.
The slide rule.
Oh, the slide rule. It would seem not. That would seem to be a logical embellishment therein, though. Huh.
You need to put another scale on there.
Yeah, it does seem kind of silly without the.
It's just a ruler.
Just a ruler at that point, right?
It's a ruler with a log scale.
It's a ruler with a log scale. That's not a slide rule.
This is like something out of XKCD.
So let's see. All right. Well, let's see. This one supposedly. Oh, it supposedly has sound. Let's see if that.
Is the sound connected?
No.
I have it turned up.
Maybe not very sound. Well, I mean, regardless, I'm not hearing anything on here. That's weird.
Does
All
it
right.
change the picture as well?
It does.
Which it changes the picture as I move. It just doesn't seem to
Well,
make.
that's exciting.
You can move your mouse to make. Okay, well, maybe he means that more conceptually than. Oh well.
Making the sound ultrasound.
There we go. Cool. Else. Oh, that's a lot of
So-
code for an if.
Speaking of ultra things, Trader Joe's actually sells microwave asparagus in a little plastic pouch, but I guess you have to put your own SMA connectors on or something. I think it's S-band asparagus.
Indeed. More of the same. Okay. I feel like this one we've seen before, but
But still, it's cool.
yeah,
Where's Dorothy?
indeed.
They just gonna call it Yellow Brick Road, but I think Disney owns it.
No, that's interesting.
It's not much code, but kind of neat. Apparently, seems a little. Or
What's the, is the language case sensitive?
no.
Oh, okay. I was wondering because there's capital Y but lowercase x. That's why I was kind of
Oh yeah,
confused.
that is weird.
What is the input?
It's a dielectric forth where the entire program is run once per pixel.
Okay.
That's the
Y and X
And
are
it's-
the
and it's a
location
float.
on the screen, and T is time.
So it's any position of the, yeah.
Question about that. There are, I think 16 storage registers in the language.
Yes.
Are those shared, or are they also for fixed?
So there's a bit of jiggery pokery going on there. So they are shared in the sense that if you the program gets run once with them shared, but with no time delta with the DT value, with the DT value set, and then they're each run again per pixel where they're separate. So there's and the reason for this is that there's no easy way for them to be shared other than to be sort of fanned out.
So they're shared through time, but not through space.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Indeed. Which is sort of again the limitations of the shaders that they're being mapped to.
Trying to avoid mentioning potpourri.
Indeed.
So hard to tell whether it's consensual.
Oh dear. Rise. So the cool thing, of course, is that it lets you do a lot in a little bit. Snowy tree.
But is he defining Y back there?
Which way?
Two back. Yeah, there.
Two back.
Colon Y.
It's redefining Y. Redefining Y. That's loud.
Yeah.
That happens only once, right, Brad?
Which?
That colon definition for Y happens only once.
So Y is a built-in word in Haiku Forth, but they're redefining Y in terms of the current definition.
But it's once. Is that right?
Yes, like not once per pixel, if that's what you mean.
It
Yeah.
is, because this is, it can
Yeah.
be iterative.
Yeah.
So, but you're only saying, but any colon definition you have in your IQ only get defined once.
Yes.
For the first pixel, or just for the first pixel define?
Strictly you're pointing out an interesting flaw, which is that this is an aspect in which it's syntactic rather than imperative. It's parsing it only once. At that point, it is actually entering it into the dictionary. So underneath, yeah, that is an interesting point. That is a place where it is not sort of repeatedly doing them. And this is a recurring issue with these, which is that because they're mapped to the shaders in this way, there isn't, like you don't have, there's no words for there's no ability to sort of manipulate the dictionary. The dictionary is sort of a hidden thing. If that makes any sense. So for many of these, they end up bearing a greater resemblance almost to a mathematical function than a program per se. Is the other one called Wilted too? No, I'm confused. That's lovely.
There's another Wilted.
There was another Wilted. Let's go back.
Wilted Redux.
Whoa, well, that's weird that one came
Okay.
before. Anyways. Slow couple months here. Let's see. Actually, we're back in April. Ice bars. What? Looks like ice bars.
Yes.
It does. Huh. Lava lamps.
Probably show us one we haven't seen for a while and we won't remember it.
Indeed, that's the, yeah, let's see. So there's hypnosis reverse. And,
That's not a haiku.
What the comments?
Is it allowed to comment a haiku?
What comments in the haiku? I mean, it's not a haiku at that point.
Should we evaluate?
What's that? Square and circle. Oh,
Ooh,
this
this
one.
one-
Wow, they used a lambda in the.
Lambda.
That's yeah. That's been one of the joys, especially the ones from King's associates that are in Chinese, where they, which in fact, speak of which, so here's some that are actually drawing recognizable shapes, but at quite tedious efforts. Why lambda? I wonder. Oh, it looks like they're using it for. They're defining it there as x squared plus y squared square rooted. So it's the distance from the.
What's going on with the vertical bar?
What's that?
What's going on with the vertical bar? Is that syntactically significant?
Scroll down.
Vertical bar where?
I mean, in the code, scroll down.
They defined. Yeah, they defined it as. Let's see, IY.
Yeah, that should really be on a line by itself.
So this is
Readability.
So your floor, yeah, I and then IY, IX and IY are X and Y floored.
And then N is just 2. Why would you? Okay, and then.
Oh, because he's using n several different places, maybe, or at least was.
He probably was, and then okay. So he's
It's such a relief that this isn't commented.
okay.
What? Comments?
It stores my
So
faith.
hold on, what is he doing?
I am the heckler.
Isn't it
Oh, I see.
obvious?
So he's got the.
My role for this phase of the presentation is heckler.
Oh, okay.
This is the beauty of being just sort of the critics for all the things, right? Yeah, I believe what he's doing is this is doing the masking to pick which of the whether it's on for that particular quadrant, and then it's convoluted as that seems. Hence so he's got various things, and then it's on for the different 4. Wow, that's very clever. Oh my.
More of the same.
More of the same, but you know. Oh wow. And off down the bottom.
Alphas and betas and gammas and oh my.
Wow. Some thought was put into that.
And fees too.
No. I am
There's a
duly
theta.
impressed. Well, I mean that's at least appropriate that he used theta for the after he gets the angle back out. But, huh?
Yeah.
Lambda. I would have chosen lambda for distance. Is that it? Is
For
that it?
length, maybe?
For length, yeah.
Wait a minute, where is the
Yeah.
line?
Which the theta is here. So
Oh, there it is.
yeah, it's an arctan. It's an arctan. So he's getting the angle and he's getting the distance.
Okay, so that, okay, I see,
Huh. Wow. Half inner. He's got. He's impressively using both A and alpha. That's bold.
Gonna run out of Greek letters and go to the.
Well, how many letters do you, is this full Unicode?
It's full Unicode.
So you have a lot of letters that you could compress your code with.
Actually, that's a thing I haven't seen yet. Is somebody use emoji? I'm like, why did he go? What is he doing emoji?
Okay.
We
Okay.
need some people using emoji. This is a challenge to the people out there.
See, now I'm gonna have to come up with something with Klingon.
Yep. Is it in the set now? Oh, that's awesome. All right.
As is Elvish as
Oh
well.
wow. Okay. We need Klingon haikus for next time. Clearly.
I swear Elvish was in HP control language. I mean, I used to get all this printout that was in Elvish.
You read Exponent Cuneiform too. That's
It's not a black hole. It's a blue hole.
That reminds me of the Atari video game Tempest. God, I'm dating myself.
YouTube doesn't get you.
There's nothing wrong with that.
That looks like a.
That looks pretty cool.
It does.
Yeah.
It's not too
That could be
bad.
done as like a flame.
That's not bad for the.
What is it level
It has a looping.
Which? So no, it renders once per. It's continuously drawing, but there's time in there. As you can tease it. Yeah. 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 That's actually why all these constraints on the language is because it's being mapped to a GLSL shader and all of the things. So. Aha.
Like magic.
Well, I'm guessing this has lots of the. Oh, I'm disappointed. See, here he hasn't gone to the Greek letters yet, but it's a similar kind of a.
So, this is executed locally,
Yes.
and the presentation is dependent on getting
The tiny
haikus
little haiku,
from
just
the
yeah.
web the way everybody else does.
Yeah.
This isn't a
But the
local-
amount of data coming down from the web is minuscule. Just the program.
Yeah, but it's the same way that everybody else deals with it. You don't have a local haiku thing.
No.
So if
You
the
could.
internet-
I
if
can
the
run one
internet
if I want.
went away in the next 20 seconds, you wouldn't be able to continue.
Correct.
Alright.
I have occasionally, although reminding me not lately, snarfed down the haikus lest they get the database get corrupted. But.
So, you said that the haiku is run once per pixel, so effectively it depends on which pixel it's currently at.
Yeah, that feeds X and Y.
Yeah, with X and Y. So I was wondering what would happen if you had like the colon definition run depend on the XY, so then you would have like sort of you could factor out the image like.
So when I say it's right, so this is you caught me in shenanigans here. The colon definitions are there is a limited grammar here, and so they are being parsed, and so that is not part of execution in
So
the
it's
normal.
only run for the first. It's only run separately.
Think of it as a fourth with a little bit of grammar, so that there's it's actually it's going to recognize whether they match up.
Just an abbreviation, so it gets
Yeah,
substituted in.
so it gets substituted in. Yeah, so there's two places where that's the case. There's for the colon definitions, and there's also for if else.
But does it last for the next iteration of the program? It's only for.
Again, think of it as there's actually a compilation step, and then the program runs once.
Okay, so
So
it just substitutes the content of the colon definition for its name, and then that's what runs.
yes.
Okay.
And that actually also is, I do that for another reason, which is that lets me, I used to worry about this more than I do, but because I'm combining them together like that, that lets me count how many total operations it's doing. So there is a limit where it will turn pink on you if you've used more cycles than you.
Yeah.
So there's no way to do an unbounded computation. If you have something, you can't do anything recursive for that same reason, and then you've got.
Recursive and random. And
Yeah. So I cap the number of cycles per thing so that it can't. Yeah, blow up the-
There's a challenge. The Y Combinator.
Yes, indeed. So, a descendant of one of my favorites, the flower is like, yeah.
It's like a
What's that?
It's the same guy, right?
Yes, indeed. I don't know if he's the originator. I think he is the originator of this. This is a descendant of another one that sort of has a similar look. But it's quite something, and it really does look like a flower. Given
That's very little.
that's very little code, right? Like that's just amazing. That's
Is that a escape time calculation?
sorry. So this,
Escape time?
oh, let's see. So it's doing it's
From
duplicating and then doing
from
a
the test.
square and then a log. So it's decay of some. Yeah. So it's sort of how many cycles does it? Yeah, that's actually kind of like a fractal in the sense that it's how many it's doing four iterations of a thing.
Brad,
Yes.
I noticed in that A definition, it has something called C.
Yeah. So there's a couple of built-in words I have for a complex multiply and a complex
okay,
add.
all right.
Yeah.
All right, that's a
So,
concept.
and those came up like at least in some of my early experimentation when when I first put this thing together long time ago now. I wasn't actually sure you would be able to do very much that was interesting with a small amount of code, and so I had a couple of words like that sprinkled in because I was concerned that it would take too many words to do something useful, and that it wouldn't be possible to get a proper haiku, of which I don't think this isn't actually 575 or whatever, but so that was me hoping that if I had some slightly more interesting words, I could get to get to proper haikus and have them do something visually interesting.
So the next version of this website will be Fourth Limericks then, right?
Indeed.
That's funny.
The last word of every sentence must be a factor.
This one's nice. Like, it's very kind of feather-light. Oops. Oh yeah, we're toggled down to the bottom.
Oh.
It is.
That's
Dr. Ting, we need. What's the title? I think he's asleep. Oh dear. I'm afraid the title will have to wait. But I believe that is from Sam Chen, though. I can recognize his smeared Mandelbrot. Yeah, you can see this is the common pattern. The way people end up doing fractals is they'll have something that's one cycle of it, and then they'll just stack them up that way because we don't know. And this one seems broken.
Well, no, that's what it's supposed to be.
Oh, okay. Clearly. I'm uncopyrighted, indeed.
Really. Nice Julius Secchi back there.
And wait, now we're back in May. So I think that was that the end of it? Oh no, we already flipped around and backwards in time. So. Oh wait, did we literally get none until? That's sad. Okay. Alrighty then. On to the main presentation. Do we have something in between, Kevin? I've forgotten the schedule.
Does anybody need to go to the bathroom? Okay then, you're on.
Alrighty then. All right. So last time when we were all here, Ed Fallon came by and gave a delightful presentation on this Nike Hercules simulator, and of course I was horribly distracted during the presentation because I wanted to run the program, and of course the thing was, well, he's got on his website the basic source code, and he has a copy of an exe, and he says guaranteed to be free of viruses and whatnot. And of course, much as I'm sure that's likely true. The other issue, of course, is that I was on a Linux laptop, and this is an exe, and it's an exe. It's a 32-bit exe, and these days with Wine, you have to have all of the 32-bit things on your Linux system in order to be able to run old 32-bit exes. So compatibility, not so much. So I thought to myself, well, he's got the basic source here. Surely it wouldn't be that hard to put together a basic interpreter to handle said program. So yeah, and the notion in my head was that I've often thought about putting various fourths on the web, and the trouble is that it's sort of an endless pit of things you might do. And what was nice about having a particular program is say, well, I'll do enough to make this one program work, and that will keep me from getting too far off in the weeds. It was an interesting program to pick because he's got tons of, well, I'll show you later, but the program it's got a lineage built into it. He's got lots of commented out sections, and clearly it sort of worked in some other old basic, and then he's brought it over into the new one and kept the old code commented out and all this sort of thing. But my main goal was to run the code as is. I figured that was the rules of the game. I should be able to run it as is in a browser. So what did the thing require? It has arrays, it has integers, doubles, singles, and strings in various places. It's interesting in the sense that it is both old and new style basic. It has it does not use a lot of it uses a lot of modern constructs like a structured if else if, but well, although not universally, but it also uses go sub. So it has select case. It has a const construct that I'm not sure I've ever seen before, as well as curly braces for initialization, which is something else I don't think I've seen in the basic ports. But I should say it is currently targeting something called Free Basic, although apparently it's not the latest version of Free Basic. It's some stale version that he had a copy of at some point, and the language has diverged since then. It uses labels, not line numbers, which is interesting. Even though it uses the structured else if and end if, which are kind of a vintage where BASIC started to acquire subroutine and function definition, it does not use said facilities and instead uses go sub and return for all of its routines, which is interesting and unusual. It uses the sort of QBasic style graphics, but it uses a free BASIC specific mode that's 1280 by 1024 and a 24-bit pixel depth. It uses drawing commands like line, keyset, and circle. And it uses a mouse with a free BASIC specific word called getMouse. Word statement. And it uses locate, print, and also print using, which is indeed fine. Print using is the sort of formatted version of print. And it also intriguingly has some C influence on it. It uses plus equals and minus equals, which I have never seen in the BASIC either. At least
add increment and add and subtract difference.
Yeah, but in a BASIC, right? Isn't that it's unusual? It's like whoa. Unlike at least the old GW Basics of old, it actually has a proper A10 too, which is life is pretty rough without it. So the approach that I took, and I should say I ended up doing, depending on your definition of such things, what's closer to a compile and then run rather than an interpreter. Although there's sort of, it's all running on top of JS, so there's caveats to that. So I parse up front. So if you have any syntax errors in your program, it will sort of yell at you up front. I have a simple tokenizer, and there's just a function that chews through and understands enough about how you lex in the context of this language to pull out the tokens as strings. And then I have a couple of things that are syntactically disallowed that I use as markers for like end of line and things like that. And one interesting bit with parsing BASIC is that it cares quite a bit about line where the lines end. End of line is significant in the language. There is another feature that's in this particular variant is using the underscore as a line continuation. So when there is a line, then that's how it's done. And then just a simple recursive descent parser on top of that. Another sort of nice simplifying assumption I hit upon fairly early was to allocate all the variables in a set of a few typed arrays. So I have one typed array for each of the basic types, and then a typed array per dimensioned array. That's nice because that lets me do something else, which is I currently am cheating in terms of doing all of the proper type checking, and I'm leaning on all of the conversions that happen in JavaScript through those typed arrays to do proper type handling. It's something where if you had, that means that if there are programs that are syntactically invalid that are invalid in terms of type checks that should fail that don't in the current implementation. And then I just emit JavaScript as I'm doing this recursive descent into a current op. And then the issue is, of course, I'm running on top of JavaScript, and JavaScript has the fun and unpleasant property that it's embedding in the web is event-driven, and so you have to, for a number of interesting things that you would normally block for in a typical tradition, in a classic BASIC, you have to yield to the event loop. So in order to allow for this, each of the operations is its own function, and they yield basically at the end of every basically a basic block. So anytime there's an opportunity for branching, they yield, or any place where they would have to yield to the yield back to wait for events. Or I also kind of cheat a little in any place where there's a fix-up needed, rather than have to worry about putting a fix-up in the middle of an operation. I assume that I'm only going to do fix-ups on something that is sort of done as I've done the parse.
What does fix-up mean in this context?
Fix-up primarily means, so you notice that there's the structured if-else and also the select. For those, I have to emit code and then come back when I found the end of the structured if-else and go back in.
And it's like the way if
Exactly. So for those, so for those, I have to keep a stack of statements and then go touch them up at the end. For control in terms of go-tos and go-subs, I keep a dictionary keyed on the label and line number, and then have that reference the index in this list of opcodes. So kind of eclectic, but saves me the issue of having to deal with how to yield in the middle of code. And then as I'm at runtime, there's a return stack to track where you're at in terms of go-sub and return. One thing that I did differently from some of the other Webby experiments that I've done with Force, at least, is decided to try to embed it in a page where the assumption is you're using a text editor to prepare the program. And so the idea is I wanted to minimize, given a piece of basic code, what's the amount of text that you have to add to that to make it a thing that you can put up on a web page. But I also had the goal that I wanted to support Node.js so I could have tests to go with it that can run headless. So this is what I ended up with, where there's sort of there's several modes of operation. One of the modes of operation, you can use it inline like this. And so you can sort of have your minimal HTML file, and then you pull in the basic implementation, and then I use type text basic to reference basic. Now, this has a whole bunch of problems that I'll get to, but at least on most browsers, what that means is it'll happily ignore this, and the interpreter can go in and reach out and do this. Now, dynamically, what happens is after the page is loaded, it will go find all of these text basics fragments and inject a canvas for the screen to the basic and run it, so you get something like that. And this is just actually an iframe with that same program embedded on it. There's another mode of operation where you reference the source in a separate file, so you could put the source in a separate file. This has a critical caveat, though, compared to what you would do with JavaScript because of the same origin policy. Basically, the idea is that on when you have JavaScript, even if this is some remote origin fragment of JS, that's a permissible thing to do because of history. But if you want to have a programmatic load of a file and it's from a different origin, then there are a bunch of restrictions that come into play. And you can, so what this means is that, for example, say I want to use Ed's copy of his basic on his website, I'm not able to just directly, I can't just have a 3-line file and reference his site because I'm not able to do the remote load to behave in the same way that it would if he had a JS file there. So an interesting limitation, but
so script source is not restricted by some origin. Are you using Ajax to actually do the fetch?
I'm using Ajax for the fetch for these basic files.
Okay, so you're not relying on the source fetch.
Right, right. And unfortunately, my suspicion is that historically browsers probably unconditionally did the fetch. And at least my memory is that they, in many cases, were actually very bad about disregarding the type and just treating everything like JS. But at least in contemporary browsers, what seems to happen is that it just, if it's not either no type or type JS, it will just not even do the fetch. And so, as far as it's concerned, there's no content there. So you can't. There's no way to hijack the loading mechanism for JS scripts. Short of if the file was actually hosted somewhere and you loaded it as JS. The other approach I could have taken, I suppose, is if I put something up top that sort of escaped, you have if you assume not a plain basic file, but a basic file that's been sort of made to be syntactically ignorable JS, then you could, if you wrapped it in something. But that sort of, anyways, gets very roundabout quickly. So for most of the kinds of programs I was interested in anyways, this kind of style where you embed the thing seemed more interesting anyhow. What I primarily had in my head was sort of programs for archival and or sort of little standalone toy examples. So that's that. Images are another one that are special like that. I believe there is some jiggery pokery you can play to try to get around this with images, but gradually browsers have gotten better and better about locking down sort of all the goofy ones. They've sort of, having previously been worked on the browser, they sort of have incrementally swallowed the pain of deprecating the various behaviors that if you wanted to be completely compatible you had to do in terms of some of these things. And I think we're now at a point where you would only be able to sort of co-opt something if it actually decoded properly as an image, or if it actually properly decoded as JS, and then use it for some dual purpose. The other mode of usage is through Node, and that I'm able to use the same. One of the goals I had was to make the same. I wanted to just have it all live in one source file, just for simplicity. And so the single source file is also loadable as a Node.js module, and it detects what's surrounding it, and you can run things like this. You can do graphics, including that. Originally, only the mode 21. I recently added a few more of the modes, although not all of them. In mode 21, the colors are in like a 24-bit value, and it supports all the various things like the F for a fill on a circle, so you can do something like that. There's the random function. You can do lines, things like that. There's mouse input. This is, I believe, just a true. I don't think this comes from. I don't think this was in. I don't think this was in QBasic, but it's certainly part of TrueBasic, and you can ask for mouse events and do a thing like this. And you'll notice that it it has use of labels, and it also has a structured do loop as well, which is fascinating. So testing, the way I set up testing is to run stuff via Node.js, and then I have it up on Travis CI. The other interesting bit is that this one, and like a bunch of others, you'll notice this is actually up at like one of the Google. It's actually a properly open source Google thing with the right kind of license and things. I went and did that process this time, sort of in the right way. So it's up there in a canonical place. The way the tests look is sort of like this. You have a whole program, and then a test expectation, and then there's another optional argument for an error result. So I'm able to test error messages as well, and so confirm sort of for a series of examples. I added this actually fairly late in the process. I initially just sort of used can I parse Ed's program as the sort of test to get the parser up, and didn't worry so much about functionality. And then I started adding tests as I added functionality. Initially, with an eye to the things where Ed's program was failing in ways that I couldn't understand. Some of the cases, though, with Ed's program, ultimately Ed figured out. We had a few places where, for instance, he actually noticed that my ELSIF was broken at some point, and this was due to some less than carefulness on my part about sort of gluing together those ops. So a number of things are missing from it. It doesn't enforce type checks, so if you do the right kinds of things, you can get into a situation where you'll get a weird runtime failure, and or where you'll get type coercions that aren't normal for BASIC but are just peeping through to JavaScript underneath. The graphics performance is a mixed bag. One of the issues is that Ed's program uses pset all over the place, and I'm turning that into a fill rect, and there's a bunch of JS is fairly baroque about how you set the current color, and so it's relatively expensive the way that it works currently. I can probably go back and fix that by using. There's a way to get just a typed array for the content of the pixel buffer and draw into that, but then I have to do my own line plotting and all the things. It's fast enough that it's sort of marginally usable on reasonably fast systems, but I have slower systems, or Ed also has run into some systems where it's so-so. And of course, things I was able to simplify my way out of. There's no text scrolling because, at least in the core of Ed's program, we didn't need it, so I didn't implement it. And it would be nice to implement some additional modes and get input for images and a structured functions would be nice as well. Actually, this is a lie. I actually sat this morning. I implemented this while I was sitting here. I'm like, I'll do reading data. That won't be so hard. And there's no input statement either. So, and files. So I'm going to go to the demo in a moment, but maybe an interactive mode. It would be nice to have a little command line type in the programs. And of course, I got to run more programs. So run the classics. So for those of you who don't remember, there's of course Donkey, which I learned recently. Apparently, Bill Gates himself was involved in writing. And then of course there's Gorilla, which was the sample with QBasic. So not able to run them. Donkey uses def seg in one place, which is weird. You need to ignore that. I believe it's just using it. It's using it. There's one spot where it does a poke for some behavior. I'm not quite sure what. Then
it sets the default data segment for 64K peek and poke.
But I'm saying the reason that they're using defseg is to use peek and poke for to toggle some state of something with CGA. I'm wondering if it's maybe one of the palette. There's some of the palette features you can't get to. I think with the built-in thing. Something I need to go look at that one. The other problem was this one of the things that's needed, I believe, was also get and put, just put the images. This one,
But you have a source.
yes, yeah. I just haven't gotten to it. It started with Ed's program, which
You
will.
could manipulate the source. in
I
such
could
ways
change
to
the
make it-
program is the other option, but
Yeah,
that's
there you
cheating.
go.
It's cheating.
Yeah.
Gorilla, the issue
All
is
fair in love and code.
Gorilla. I believe the primary missing bit is it actually uses subroutine definition because it was meant to be a demo of QBasic. So, lessons for WebForth. So it was nice to have a single use case to drive this. That actually meant that I didn't spend that much time in the grand scheme of things. Make graphics easy. It was fun to, and I can't spell the word graphics apparently.
Close enough.
Make the
You know what
graphics.
you meant.
It was nice to not like sort of in my head go through all the different ways one can do graphics. And just say, well, I have to implement the API that I've been given. That was nice. I kind of was worried about this JS function for basic block being sort of a performance issue, and I'm not completely convinced it's not, but it wasn't as horrible as I was afraid it would be in terms of performance. And this is kind of a perennial conundrum with transpiling to JS, is that you have to, if you have something that needs to yield, you've got a problem basically because you don't have arbitrary control flow in JS. So, and unfortunately not in WebAssembly either.
I was just about to ask if WebAssembly was going to be an option.
I had toyed with the thought. It was easier to target something that I could sort of interactively debug.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't solve this particular issue because WebAssembly is also strictly structured, and so it has the same limitation. If anything, I think it would be strictly more work, simply because I'm leaning on places where the JS behavior happens to do naturally what I needed for basic, and so I would probably have to implement in total more things. It might be faster, but considering I think right now the performance bottlenecks are mostly around the graphics interface to the outside, probably not in ways that would matter for the program. Why do they consider allowing inline code? I have no idea why I said that on the slide.
Inline JavaScript?
I don't think that sounds that's a plausible explanation, but I can't think of what that was for. So anyways, let's go to the. Sorry, which?
JavaScript in line with Forth? Is that what you're talking about?
I'm not sure what I meant. That's really weird. What did I mean by that? I can't. Okay, this is what happens when you make the slides too late. So let's see. We'll go through the little bit of tour of the thing. So to give you a sense here, actually, let's go. Okay, so the way, as we saw before, simple little programs, there's a prime printer, and all that one had to do to do this was this tiny little thing here, which has the thing in line. The actual actually, let me go to a different. I'll go to a different view to show off the. So the actual basic is currently we're up to 1745 lines, which is fascinating because if you compare to Ed's program is 3,000 lines, so it's like, you know.
That's a net win.
What's that?
So that's a net win.
Yeah. The sorry. So that's the interpreter. So let me show running it all together here now. Actually, hold on. We'll work up to the demo. So, oh yeah. Actually, we're ready for that. So let's go to. So here it is, and a number of nice things about it is that it scales appropriately to the screen size. That's kind of a mixed bag because if you don't have a decent GPU, that can be a fairly costly operation. One of the problems Ed ran into, right, was screen size with the thing. It's that it has a certain size baked in. What I do is there's whatever screen mode you're in, there's a background canvas. You draw into that, and then it gets bucket bell and centered in the middle of the display. On a fast enough thing, the machine, most of the things work. So you can hold down the mode button here and mark the different folks, and then you can pick a target. Designated target. I'm sorry, Kevin. You see it's designated there, and then you can push the fire button, and off the missile goes. This display here is a fascinating performance bottleneck. It has an interesting thing where these two displays are being toggled between to draw. And if you get behind, it favors that display over this one. And so if you have any trouble keeping up with the drawing rate, then this one will kick out. And unfortunately, it's doing this by sort of incrementing a counter. And so once you fall behind, you sort of fall indefinitely behind. And so you can see the arc is swinging over there, and they will collide at the point which they meet. And you can see the two radar bumps
flying straight level right at you.
Yes. And once it hits, we'll see the two radar bumps sort of collide. There were lots of little subtleties that Ed picked up on. The tick marks were wrong up above, and that was due to my LSIF bug. Oh, I had another fun one where I had there was a default double statement, and then we get the gazap because we hit, and you can also put it in auto mode. Of course, actually, does it reset after auto? Oh, there it goes. I had a bug that the one that Ed caught was the LSIF was busted. The when I figured out indirectly from some of the hints he had pointed out was that I was ignoring the default double statement, and I made the default type single. But of course, the default double type lets you override by the letter of the first character of the variable name what the type is. And strangely enough, precision mattered for parts of the program. So let's see. Let's take a quick glance at the interpreter, compiler. So there's a bunch of setup. There's some state kept for this collection of ops, which is just an array of the generated JavaScript code as it runs. There's actually let me just prob that manually. So there's so when it's in debugging mode, so I turn on a debugging option where now I'm emitting the text of, how well you can see that, the text of each of the line number fragments. So what it's basically doing is at each potential label position, it builds up a little bit of code, and then if there's any kind of flow control, like for instance here, the instruction pointer is getting popped off of the return stack, so this is a return statement. Then it starts a new block. And there are these double arrays for the various variables. There's C. I'm using the convention C for the constants, and so just counting off and generating new values at each position. You can see some of the locate and print statements embedded. Let's see, there's some fascinating things. Print using was quite a pain to implement. It's actually not a very, there's quite a lot of variety in terms of different levels of complexity of different implementations of print using. For Ed's program, there was very little, he was only using sort of the most basic form of it, but it was sort of hard to resist implementing a little bit more and a little bit more. So that's probably one of the places where there's excess complexity. Let's see. Obviously, I had to be very consistent about using the convention of -1 for basics as well. Shared commonality with Fork there. We're conditioned for true and false values. But most expressions end up with something like this. I just inline the different math ops. I probably could get some speed ups if these were wrapped in a closure so that it knows that the global object hasn't been mutated. There could be a couple of fewer JS checks. But if I was worried about that, then I should target LASM or target something else. So anyways, that's that. I should do one other thing, which is I don't know the extent. I confess that let's take a look at the actual. So this is the actual. So I basically just literally took Ed's program and pasted those magic 3 lines in the top, and a script tag at the bottom. And as you can see here, he's got it's another fascinating thing about the program is that he uses a mode. Basic has the option statement. It's sort of pragma, and there's an option explicit, which I had never seen before, which says you have to explicitly declare all your variables, and he uses that. And so there's a dim statement for each value. Here's that defined double that I happily ignored early on in the process of parsing and thought, oh, well, this doesn't matter. I don't have to care about a declaration like that. But as you can see, it's like he's got this interesting mix of indented sort of structured things, or actually better example would be all these nice nested if in cases, and yet here it's got a label and you're using go subs to go between it, and all the variables are global. So
this is very much like Amiga Basic back in the day.
Anyways, questions?
Was it worth it?
Well, so in fairness, I was kind of, there was a point at which it was sort of fun to see the thing run. I did finally actually fire up Ed's original XC on a different machine that I had Windows on, but the screen size wasn't right, and so it was a struggle to actually see all the pieces of it. So it was actually gratifying in the sense of being able to actually run it and have it fit whatever screen size. I don't know, Basic sort of tickles a sort of fun, nostalgic whatever, but I think the biggest thing was that this was a way for me to sort of, if I had done this with a fourth, there would be no constraints, and so I would have felt like, oh, I'll have to think about all these different things, and so this was very scoped, and I think I have to find a way to carry that over to other contexts. I'm not sure. I'm not. Yeah. You'll. I guess you'll tell if it stuck with me if I actually get around to getting Donkey and Grella running. Of course, at that point, it will rapidly converge into being actually useful in general. But we'll see. Well, insofar as a basic compiler is useful in 2018. But.
If you want to teach someone to program, let's say they wanted to write a thing that would read in data from a thermometer or something, log it, print it out as a report.
Yes.
What would you tell them to do?
I would, if it was from a thermometer, I would probably point them at Arduino. That would be it would be easy enough to wire something
Write
together.
a piece of sketchy code.
Indeed, that would be at least my knee-jerk reaction there. depends on the. I mean, if it was, if you sort of were just trying to create a bespoke thing, I imagine there are a variety of different sort of easier to use environments. If you're trying to sort of have real solid learning, that would be the one I would. There you have a real microcontroller. You'd have something, something that resembles a programming language people actually use for things, and a standalone device. Yeah.
Well, let's say it was Windows and you wanted to get it into an Excel spreadsheet. You plot the temperatures in the backyard, or do a science fair experiment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the irony in this, who is it? James Bowman, when he was here a while ago. The irony is that it's gotten so hard to, compared to say Apple II days, to physically hook up the hardware direct to your PC. That's the challenging bit.
I could probably find any number of
The Raspberry Pi. Yeah, that's sort of the answer. Is you
Yeah,
put,
that's what James Bowman said. You could get the Raspberry Pi with the header of GPIO.
Yeah.
And it's just a,
Yeah, I guess you could get like a USB thermometer,
yeah. Then
and then, presumably it would come with some
I don't know,
driver or something that would allow you to read it.
it's an interesting question though. The USB thermometer. I don't know. My guess would be, having never tried to do such a thing, that it would come with some bespoke tool that lets you use it, but only with their particular proprietary program, and wouldn't have sufficient documentation to tell you that they actually talk to the driver. But
is there any way to get around USB? Because I don't really like USB. To be honest.
I think that's the fundamental problem. I think, and it's sort of
You could bit bag it with your printer port back in the olden days. What's a printer port?
Yeah.
Oh wait, I've got a USB to printer port cable.
Yeah.
You have for that?
Yeah, maybe that. Yeah. Or the FTDI like the FTDI UART adapter. Computer sees that as a microcontroller that's used with use them as GPIOs instead of as UART. And that works. There's not many of them, but it works.
at least you get a few pins you can control. I think the trouble is that there's complexity on both sides of the fence, right? It's like in any sort of external, even like a temperature item thing, unless you built the circuit yourself, you're gonna have to talk some protocol to a thing. And
It's nice to get a laptop that has GPIOs on it.
yeah.
Exposed extremely.
Well, you have a Bluetooth thing that talks to your laptop, and the Bluetooth thing is Bluetooth to GPIO if it's an Arduino or a
Yeah.
Raspberry Pi that can speak Bluetooth.
But we're still stuck with making buffered external devices. You can't have real time parallel ports anymore. Oh well.
Well, complexity of our age. All right. Any other?
Thank you, Brad. Let's take a break for cake.